Somewhere between reality and eternity, between pride and devotion, a motionless man places his right hand upon his chest and gazes toward a point that does not belong to time. His gaze neither defies nor submits. It contemplates something higher, something only he seems to see. That man is the protagonist of one of the most enigmatic and powerful portraits of the Spanish Renaissance, a work that has crossed centuries laden with mystery, silence, and spirituality. The Gentleman with His Hand on His Chest, by Domenico's Theotokopoulos, the painter the world knows as El Greco, painted around the year 1587 or 1588. During the artist's early years in Toledo, this work not only marks the birth of the great mystical style that would define his legacy, but it also contains an unresolved enigma. Who is this gentleman really? His identity has been lost among hypotheses, legends, and vanished documents, and perhaps precisely for that reason, the painting has become a kind of universal mirror of the Spanish soul, of honor, of faith, and of inner contradiction. El Greco, born in Crete and trained in Venice and Rome before settling in Spain, was no ordinary painter. His art is an alchemy where East and West merge, where Byzantine light blends with Venetian color and Toledan spirituality. When he arrived in Toledo, he found a city that seemed made for his spirit, a labyrinth of ancient stones, monks, courtiers, and penitents. There he understood that faith could be painted as a flame. There his brush ceased to imitate the visible and began to translate the invisible. The Gentleman with His Hand on His Chest belongs to that early Toledan period, when El Greco was beginning to define himself as a visionary. At first glance, the work appears simple. A man dressed in black with a white ruff holds his hand over his heart, but nothing in it is simple. Every detail is a symbol, every shadow a revelation. The dark background is not merely emptiness, it is the threshold of the eternal. The black of the garment is not the absence of color, it is silence, introspection, a kind of spiritual shroud. The light that caresses his face is not from a candle or a window, but from an awakened consciousness. The gesture of the hand, carefully extended across the chest, is the key to the mystery. Some interpret it as an oath of honor, typical of 16th century gentlemen, a gesture of fidelity to truth and to God. Others see in it an intimate declaration of faith or repentance, a silent promise before the divine. Some suggest that the hand expresses the union between the human and the spiritual, between action and thought. And there are those who believe that El Greco, more than portraying a man, painted a symbol of the Christian soul of the Golden Age, caught between earth and heaven. For centuries, historians have asked who the model was. Some argue that it was Juan de Silva y Ribera, Marquis of Montemayor and Warden of the Alcázar of Toledo, a friend and protector of the painter. Others claim it might be a spiritual self-portrait of El Greco himself, a reflection of the foreigner who, arriving in Spain, had to earn his place among nobles and theologians. And still others see in him an anonymous knight, an archetype, the very face of Castilian honor turned into an icon. Perhaps that is why his identity matters little. The portrait has ceased to be an individual and has become a spirit. El Greco's style, so far removed from Flemish realism or Italian serenity, reveals here an anticipatory modernity. The face is elongated, the eyes sink into an introspective expression, the skin seems transparent, as if blood and life no longer entirely belong to the body. The hand, excessively fine and nervous, appears more spiritual than physical. The entire body vibrates in a strange balance between matter and ascension. This pictorial language, misunderstood by many of his contemporaries, would centuries later be admired by artists such as Cézanne, Picasso, and Modigliani, who saw in El Greco a precursor of the modern soul, a mystic who painted emotion before form. But in 16th century Toledo, such a vision was not easily accepted. The Spain of Philip II lived under the Counter-Reformation, an age of religious fervor, but also of suspicion and moral rigidity. Painters were expected to obey established canons, sacred themes to follow the norms dictated by the church. Yet El Greco was always untamed. His paintings seemed to speak a higher, freer language, a language where spirituality was not imposed from without, but burned from within. Thus, the gentleman with his hand on his chest, though apparently a secular portrait, breathes the same fervor as his religious scenes. The restoration of the work, carried out at the Prado Museum in the 20th century, revealed secrets that had remained hidden under yellowed varnishes. It was discovered that the original background was not entirely dark, but possessed bluish and reddish hues, a vibration that makes the figure appear to emerge from a living penumbra. More precise strokes were also found in the hand, where the painter applied the thinnest glazes to create the sensation of skin illuminated from within. It was also confirmed that El Greco used a reddish underlayer beneath the black of the garment, which explains the subtle sheen that seems to make the fabric vibrate. All this demonstrates that far from the Castilian austerity often attributed to it, the painting is a symphony of hidden lights, a visual alchemy between restraint and radiance. As centuries passed, the painting has been interpreted in many ways. During Romanticism, writers saw in the gentleman a figure of the melancholic soul of man struggling between faith and doubt. In the 20th century, existentialist philosophers took him as a symbol of modern man, conscious of his solitude before mystery, and art historians have read him as a synthesis of the Spanish spirit, a blend of sobriety, mysticism, and silent honor. But there are also more secret readings. Some scholars have suggested that El Greco, initiated in Byzantine mysteries and knowledgeable in Neoplatonism, may have incorporated into the gesture of the gentleman an esoteric illusion, the hand upon the chest as a sign of the divine spark dwelling in the human heart, the center where the soul touches the eternal. In the tradition of Eastern icons, the hand over the heart symbolizes inner prayer, the consciousness turning toward God. If this were true, the painting would not merely be a portrait but a mystical meditation, a mirror of the soul seeking unity with the divine. A hidden taboo has also been mentioned. Some 16th century documents note that certain hand gestures were used by secret brotherhoods, confraternities, or even orders of chivalry bound by spiritual or ideological vows. The gentleman's gesture could therefore be a sign of belonging, a coded signal, a vow not before men but before an ideal. In Inquisition-era Spain, such symbols were handled with care. El Greco, always balancing orthodoxy and personal revelation, may have found in the image's ambiguity his safest refuge, a language that speaks without speaking, that shows without explaining. Nothing in the painting is accidental. The white collar, shining like a halo, contrasts with the darkness of the suit and draws attention to the face, almost as if the gentleman wore a secular aureole. The barely visible sword reminds us that he is a man of honor, yet its dim glint suggests that the true battle is no longer physical but interior. The face, with raised brows and serene expression, seems suspended in a moment of revelation. There is no pride in his eyes, but contemplation, no violence, but discipline. It is a portrait of the Castilian soul in its purest form, noble, austere, silent, and fervent. The gentleman with his hand on his chest is also a turning point in El Greco's art. From this work onward, his figures would become more elongated, more spiritual, closer to fire than to flesh. The portrait marks the passage from man to symbol, from individual to myth. It is the door through which the artist crossed from the reality of the body to the realm where painting becomes prayer. The mystery of his identity, in the end, has been his salvation. If we knew his name, his story would be confined to the archives of Toledan nobility, but by not knowing it, his figure has become universal. He is the man who promises, the man who meditates, the man who loves, the man who repents. We all fit within his silence. His gaze, steady yet calm, seems directed toward a point beyond the viewer, as if contemplating his own destiny, or perhaps ours. Through him, El Greco speaks to us not of a century, but of an eternal condition, that of the human being facing the mystery of himself. Thus, although more than 4 centuries have passed, his face remains alive. He does not belong to the past. He looks at us from the present, and reminds us without words that true honor lies not in the sword nor the title, but in fidelity to one's own spirit. The identity of the gentleman remains a riddle that seduces historians and poets, because in its ambiguity breathes the power of a living myth, and because every attempt to name him diminishes him. It is better then to listen to what the painting says without voice, that contained vibration between the black fabric that absorbs light and the oval of the face that returns it transfigured. It is better to look at the rough as a ring of purity guarding the unspoken word, to note the barely suggested sword that recalls social rank but yields prominence to the inner vow, to perceive that the hand upon the chest is not a theatrical gesture but a pact. That pact opens the doors of the spiritual century. Toledo knew how to weigh with gravity and fervor. There where monasteries dictated silence and cloisters drank from the mist of the Tagus, where the foreigner from Crete learned that light can be an ember carried within, and that to paint is not to copy the world but to reveal it. Thus El Greco created a portrait that is at once icon and mirror, a threshold where the viewer recognizes himself even if he has never worn a ruff nor held a blade. For what we see is not clothing but consciousness in a state of vigil, not fashion but a liturgy of introspection that summarizes the ethics of an age and transcends it. As the eye travels across the canvas, it discovers the subtle artifice with which the master arranges the invisible, the reddish preparation trembling beneath the dark pigment, the glazes that light the skin as if it were a lamp, the nervous stroke of long fingers that resemble feather and prayer, the gaze that seeks neither painter nor public, but a zone of silence where promises are heard. In that architecture of intimacy beats an aesthetic program that would transform Spanish painting, for from this gentleman onward portraits would no longer be mere likenesses, but diagnoses of the soul, maps of an interiority striving to remain true to an ideal. That is why the gesture has been read as a vow of knighthood, as a sign of confession, as the emblem of a secret brotherhood sworn to guard truths, even as an esoteric sign referring to the divine spark of the heart, all plausible in a time when mysticism was spoken softly and the Inquisition guarded the frontiers of dogma. Yet beyond such hypotheses remains the pictorial fact that the hand speaks and its grammar is luminous, that the curve of those fingers over black silk anchors the space like a moral compass, that the chest becomes an altar, and that the face, refined by ascetic length, receives light not as a bath, but as an emanation seeming to rise from within. For El Greco does not illuminate, he ignites with restraint. He does not describe, he embodies. He does not flatter, he demands. And each demand is fulfilled in the sobriety of a palette that renounces ornament to make way for essence. That is why the background is deep as a cloister, and the garment a quiet night, allowing the flame of spirit to rise undistracted. That is why the white ruff shines like a circle of silence. That is why the skin is not flesh but presence. At the same time, the painting preserves memory of journeys and masters, of the Venetian lesson that taught him to shape color with air, and of the Roman discipline that tempered drawing, all reoriented by the Cretan vision toward a language where the visible world stretches until it touches the sacred. Hence the elongated proportions that would later scandalize academicians and fascinate the moderns. Hence the contemplative verticality that belongs not to the courtly portrait, but to prayer. Hence the modernity the symbolist perceived and the avant-garde claimed for itself. For El Greco proved that portraiture can be a treatise of metaphysics in silence, as understood by poets who saw in this man the emblem of inner honor, and by philosophers who read him as the cipher of the modern subject, alone before his destiny yet burning. And though over the centuries men tried to restore, varnish, correct, darken, the canvas resisted fashions and returned again and again to its secret clarity. In the hands of careful restorers reappeared the hues time had hidden, the reddish vibration beneath the black, the pulse of the fine brushwork that, in the beard's outline and the gleam of the eyes, reveals the tremor of life. With it came a renewed reading of the work, not merely as a national symbol, but as a universal icon of ethical consciousness, not as a portrait of someone, but as a portrait of something, the inner decision that turns life into vocation. If there was a taboo, it was that of naming this flame, of admitting that behind the propriety of the garment dwells an endless question. Who am I when I make a promise? To what do I respond when I place my hand upon my heart? What truth do I defend when I keep silent? And the painting replies without sound, that honor is fidelity to spirit, that the sword is worth less than the word, and that true courage is to sustain one's own light when no one watches. That is why its influence did not end in Toledo. It reached religious painting, where El Greco's saints would inherit that burning verticality. It reached the Baroque portrait, which learned to prefer character over label. It reached the Romantics, who saw in shadow a theater of the soul. It reached the Modernists, who recognized in elongation an expressive possibility. It even reached cinema, which learned to sculpt faces with shadow, and photography, which understood the rough as a circle of emphasis. And today, when the viewer stands before it, a small miracle repeats itself. The image seems to listen. The gentleman does not pose, he waits. Time contracts into an instant of awareness, where identity is measured by loyalty to the invisible. Then the gesture becomes ours. We feel it close, even without ruff or sword, for each of us carries a promise not yet spoken, a debt to oneself asking for a word, and that word takes the form of a hand upon the chest, so simple and so profound. In that depth, the painting holds other subtle signs, the sharp edge of the sleeve cutting the darkness like a lintel, the slightly lifted gaze that avoids anecdote and seeks height, the restrained gleam in the pupil that reflects not a window but a thought, the beard drawn with small bristles showing the breadth of the brush, all designed so the portrait breathes rather than declaims, suggests rather than imposes, summons the silence from which true decisions are born. That is why the mystery of his name is secondary, and the mystery of his gesture essential, because El Greco wanted the viewer not to ask who is he, but what does he promise, and by turning the question into a mirror, he gave us a work that, beyond its time, trusts the freedom of the one who looks. That trust is the key to its endurance, a confidence that crosses schools and labels, resists chronology, and returns again and again, as do all fundamental vows. And when the journey ends and one steps back, the gentleman remains there, firm, sober, incandescent beneath the skin, holding with a single hand the entire moral architecture of the painting. We understand then that we have witnessed the revelation of the essential, that in this economy of means burns a high definition of the human, that honor is neither noise nor appearance, but a way of standing in the light, and that the great lesson of this portrait is simple and absolute. True nobility does not consist of titles or heraldry. It consists in recognizing within the chest a center that does not bargain, a fire that is not for sale, and living so that this flame never goes out. Then the image ceases to be oil and becomes a commandment, accompanying us beyond the museum, and walking beside us through the streets of the present, reminding us in its silence that every worthy life begins when the hand finds the heart and stays there, saying without words, "Here I am faithful."